So as usual, what we're going to do is we're going to set our project, right? So we're going to go File, Set Project. Give it a minute to pop up there, and then there's Project 2, and we'll set that. And of course that makes it the active project, so that basically particularly any image files Maya will be able to find pretty easily. Like I said, if you're kind of just working on a computer at home by yourself, the project is kind of overkill, but if you have to move it around to different computers, very, very useful, because everything goes in that one folder and all the subfolders, and everything knows where to find everything, right? The Maya scene knows where to find the images that you loaded, whether references or textures. So of course, we'll go to File, Open Scene, and of course, the nice thing is it goes right to the Project 2 Scenes folder. And there's the room. So we'll open that up. Don't save, because we don't want to save over that. There we go. And there's our room. And this is where we left off from our last video, just kind of building the room with our Create Polygon tool, right? You know, Mesh Tools, Create Polygon tool. But we also, of course, use our Snap to Grid, which was our second time we got to see it, right? And we'll get to see it a little bit more before we're done for the term. We got a couple more edit, pivot, duplicate specials to do for things like our office chair and our ceiling fan. So even that stuff that you've seen on the lamp, we're going to see a lot of that stuff again in future projects. In fact, at this point, we were actually, particularly at the end of this, we're going to see a lot of the final stuff, right? There's still a few more things, but we've kind of seen a big bulk, a big chunk of the major modeling functions we're actually using this term. So believe it or not, just in these first two projects, we kind of get through a lot of those. Not everything, but a lot of them. And what we'll do is we'll kind of keep reinforcing, keep using them. There's going to be a little less new stuff coming up in the next two projects, and more just like, hey, remember this from a previous project? Which is nice. You know, it's kind of built that way, right? The first couple of models we build, there's a lot to learn because it's all kind of brand new. But we learn a lot of good fundamental things that carry us through tons of modeling projects that make the later ones a little easier and just more practice and reinforcement of good tools. And of course, we learned about some of our options for our extrude tool, right? That when you actually extrude, it brings up the little options box. You turn keep faces together off so that we could kind of separate these out. And that offset kind of gave us that nice little even border, but it was scaling, right? It was taking the extrusion, creating the geometry, but it scaled it in evenly at the border, though. And that's what's kind of neat about that. And that's what the offset does. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to make a quick doorknob. Now, of course, you could do this with the revolve. If you really, really want to do it with the revolve, you could, just create curve tools, CV curve tool. But we've already done that a bunch, so I think we'll just kind of make a sphere and just kind of extrude the back of the sphere off. Just to kind of try and reinforce that as well, because we'll see it revolve eventually one more time for part of our ceiling fan. So we'll kind of set one more later in Project 4. So in this case, I'm just going to go create. And remember, we're always working with polygon primitives, right? The only time I really work with the NURBS primitive is the circle, which we use for our core, right? So remember, polygon primitives. Create polygon primitives. In this case, we're going to create a sphere. Now, if you're going to use Smooth Preview for this, which I think I will, remember, you want it to be a lower resolution one, right? That's kind of the thing, is that particularly when you're creating primitives and you want to use Smooth Preview because you want roundness and curvature, it does tend to be easier to use simpler meshes, right? Now in this case, if you just want a denser sphere and you just kind of follow what we did with our the top of our lamp, you can do that, right? And just kind of extrude, scale, extrude, use multi-cuts. But we can go to Sphere Options box, right? Create Polygon Primitives, because I'm just going to make a spherical doorknob. And you see it's already set pretty low. If you want it to be set higher just to work in straight low res, that's of course legit also. I do want it to be on its side though, right? Because the doorknob's going to kind of have that back little part that goes into here. So remember, you can pick the different axes that you want to create it on. In this case, I want to kind of create the sphere on its side pointing this way. And that's the z-axis, right? And 8x8 should be fine. But generally, if you're going to work with Smooth Preview, you want your primitives to be much simpler. So that they'll look pretty crappy in low res mode, but nice in Smooth Preview. But also, it makes it so when you smooth it later on, you don't have a ridiculously dense mesh. It would be about what you would have it if you started higher resolution with the sphere to begin with. So we'll create it, and you can kind of see how it's on its side, right? The little kind of triangles at the tops there, kind of that big star. So we'll hit R for scale, of course, right? And we can just grab that center handle. Remember, you don't want to be too careless and grab these guys because then it makes it oval, right? So remember, you want to grab this center one. If you do use middle mouse button, remember it will use the last used handle, right? So you have to be careful with middle mouse button. It's useful and cool, but it is based on whatever you last used, whatever axis you last used. I'll hit W for move, right? Move it up. Remember, Alt left rotates your camera. Alt middle moves your camera, right? Remember, that's where if you've got a scroll wheel on your mouse button, you do actually have a three button mouse, and you just press the scroll wheel down like a button, right? You just press it down like it's a button instead of scrolling it. And then of course, Alt right mouse button zooms. I know you're going to be tempted to use the scroll wheel as zoom, and it does work. It's jumpy though, right? The Alt right mouse button one is smoother. And of course, F, right? F for frame selection. And I know I've talked about a lot of these things before, and I'm going to try not to talk about them nearly as long as I sometimes do in some of the videos. One of the last videos I did go over for a while, but I just want to reinforce that. So here, just kind of remind you guys those basic quick keys. Remember, these manipulators have these constraint planes too that allow you to move along 2 axes. So that's very, very useful. In this case, the move tool has its own kind of center, but that's kind of view move, right? It moves based relative to the actual viewport, the view you're in. So it's called view move. Just like there's actually a view rotate, right? It's kind of that last one out there. Just rotates it based on the view. And those can be cool, right? In this case, we don't want to use those, though. So I'll left click drag, just scale that down a bit. Hit W for move it up. You see I'm taking advantage of those little squares so I can move it along 2 axes. And then we can kind of move that up there. There you go. F for frame selection, right? That zooms your camera in on the selected object. Or whatever selected, faces, edge loops, right? And it sets your camera rotate around that selection too. And that's a really cool, useful shortcut. F, right? It's actually right here, frame selection. The quick key for it's F. Now in this case, I'm going to hit 3, right? To put it in the smooth preview. Remember, page up and page down can control the resolution, right? You just want to make sure that your resolution is not too high. Usually 2 is the default, and it's not too high, but just keep that in mind. Page up and page down. Now in this case, I want the doorknob to be most of this. Doorknobs are actually pretty spherical, but they do kind of that little back part that comes out, and it's more like kind of some ridged cylinders. So I'm going to create that really quick. So remember, Q is your quick key for just your selection tool. You can always leave your move, rotate, and scales on and do selections, but sometimes it can be a little careless, right? So if you want to just not have the manipulator in the way at all, right, whether it's move, rotate, or scale, remember, Q is your selection tool. And remember, all your manipulator and selection stuff is right here also. So I'm going to hold down right mouse button over the object, right? Put your cursor over the object. Hold down right mouse button. And go to face selection because we want to select faces. Now in this case, I'm going to use tab, because remember, tab is your quick key for drag select. So you hold down tab, and you just move your left mouse button, right? You just hold down your left mouse button and move it, and it just does this quick drag select. So it doesn't grab anything on the other sides. Because you'll notice when I hold down tab for drag select, camera base is on. So right, it won't grab stuff on the back like the default pick marquee with camera based off is. If you want pick marquee to work and not select things on the back, switch camera based selection from off to on, right? But usually tab with drag select will take care of that anyways. I like to just leave pick marquee with it off so that when I want to use pick marquee for selecting everything, I can do that, or a big chunk of it, and it selects both sides. And when I want to do more precision selecting on one side, drag is really quick and easy, so I prefer drag for that stuff. In this case, I'm just going to hit R for scale it up a little bit. Now, we could just, of course, extrude faces to keep creating this, but we could also just hit delete, right? Delete on our keyboard, that gets rid of it. And of course, I could hold down right mouse button over my object and go to edge, right? Remember, when you hold down right mouse button, not right click, hold down right mouse button, it brings up your selection types, vertex, face, edge, object, right? Of course, those selection types are right here, and there are actually quick keys, so those F8, F9, F10, F11, but one of the fastest ways is holding down right mouse button. Also, a lot of your later upper division modeling instructors are really going to want you to do it this way, using the right mouse button, bring up the marking menu, bring these up. They'll be mad at you. It's a little weird, but they will be. It is a great fast way. It's the way I prefer to do it in Maya also. But remember, there are a couple of different ways to select stuff. But holding the right mouse button, a bit faster and easier, get that habit going early. And of course, we could double left click, right? So we double click with our left mouse button on an edge, and it selects that edge loop. Now, like I said, we could have kept just extruding those faces out to make it, but in this case, it might be a little easier to not worry about those faces. So we just select the border edge. Remember, these edges aren't border edges, right? They have two faces connected to them. If you extrude those, that creates non-manifold geometry. That's three faces going to a single edge. That causes all kinds of problems. Multi-cut wouldn't work through that area. Bevel would do weird stuff or wouldn't work in that area. It looks weird when it's in smooth preview. Non-manifold geometry generally is a problem. So remember, if you're going to extrude anything in Maya, the only thing you should ever extrude are faces, polygons, and border edges, right? And border edges, remember, are an edge where there's no more geometry, right? Where there's only one face connected. This edge is only connected to one face. Those are safe to extrude. In fact, that method of extruding those off is quite powerful. We've already seen it's useful now, but we'll see it's kind of more powerful methodology that you can use it for later on when we do our clock radio. So I'm going to extrude. I'm going to hit W for move it back a little bit. I'm going to extrude again. In this case, I'm going to hit R for scale it out a little bit, right? Because you always want to make sure that whenever you extrude in Maya, or even use multi-cut to put an edge loop in, that in low res, those edge loops aren't on top of each other, right? You want to make sure these edge loops actually have a little bit of distance. It doesn't have to be a lot, right? Just a little bit, right? Because if they're right on top of each other, once again, that'll make the multi-cut not work in there. It'll make the bevel because it gets confused of which edges it's working or which ones are selected. So really, whether it's in smooth preview or low res, you really don't want edge loops or edges to be occupying the exact same space, right? That would be if, like, I undid that extrusion a little bit. Control Z, come on. There we go. To there, right? They're right on top of each other. Even though I extruded, they can occupy the same space. Don't do that. So whenever you extrude, always scale a little bit or move a little bit so that they're not on top of each other. Remember, 1 is low res, 3 is smooth preview. And we'll extrude again, R for scale it out a little bit from that center one. Although this one will do the same thing, right? And you see how just by extruding and scaling out, we've kind of created this nice little ridge. We can extrude again, hit W for move, right? Just move it back a little bit. Because remember, I prefer, unless I really need to extrude along normal direction, I prefer to extrude and then switch to my regular move rotator scale tools to use the world orientation, right? That tends to work a lot better for a lot of extruding. Not all extruding, but a lot. We'll extrude again, hit W for move, grab that. In this case, it should be the dark blue arrow because I'm working on the Z axis, but since it was last selected, it's yellow. Now remember, Control E is your quick key for extrusion, right? So you don't have to keep hitting the extrude button. You can always just, Control E. And then of course I'll turn to scale, R for scale this out a little bit. Control E to extrude, R for scale. Control E, W for move, right? Move it back a little bit. Control E, W for move it back a little bit. And you can keep doing this how many ridges you want, but that should work pretty well for our doorknob. But once again, revolves can do this stuff, but you notice how if you extrude border edges with move and scale, you can actually get that revolve shape pretty quickly and easily also. Because this was largely a spherical shape and we didn't have a reference picture, I just found it easier to make it as a primitive. And it just reminds you that you don't really have to use revolve if you don't like to use revolve. It's actually a pretty nice, easy way to make those lamp shapes, chess piece shapes, baseball bat shapes, wine bottle shapes, soda bottle, right? It's kind of great for all those kinds of shapes. But extruding border edges out can do it pretty quickly and easily also. In this case, it was just pretty easy to do it this way. And that was just, we did that on our globe on the top of our bedposts, right? We did it for the top bit of the lamp. So this is not actually new. We've done this before, right? So I'm going to go back to object mode. But remember, that was just extruding border edges. And I was just using move and scale to create these shapes. Scale to kind of make these wider, and move to move them back so that you have kind of this length. So the move was used to create these lengths. The scale was used to kind of create this kind of thickness here, right? That kind of going outward. And it was just extruding to create the new geometry. In this case, it looks bad in low res. So remember, hold down right mouse button, object mode, and we can hit smooth. And that's now our low res, right? Remember, Q will turn your selection tool on and just drop that smooth operation. And there's our doorknob. You can move it into place there. Remember, W for move, R for scale if we want to make it a little bigger. W for move to move it out, kind of position it. And there's our doorknob. So yeah, doorknob. All right, so now what we want to do, let me move that a little further out, is I want to create some arched windows, right? The reason I want to do arched windows is because it really shows you a shape that you can get with a Boolean easily, right? A doorway, if it's a rectangle or square, or a window is rectangle or square, you don't really need a Boolean for that, right? Just grab some faces, extrude, scale a little bit, extrude back, you're good. Much faster and easier to do it that way. But a window that's kind of an arch shape is not exactly easy to get with an extrusion on some quads, right? So I always like to do an arched window, one, because I can show you how to make kind of a basic arch shape, or at least the cutout for an arch shape. And I can show you a shape that specifically is going to work well for Booleans, right? It's a way that this kind of shape is much easier to get with a Boolean. So let's do that. So I'm going to create the arch shape, and then we'll talk about what a Boolean is. But the arch shape is actually quite easy to make. We start with the cylinder, right? So we're going to go to create polygon primitive cylinder. Now I'm going to go to the options box for the cylinder, right? Remember, all your tools, not all your tools, but a lot of your tools might have these little check boxes next to them, right? If you just click on the actual tool itself, it'll just do the defaults without bringing the options box up. But if you go to the little checkbox next to it, right? So create polygon primitive cylinder, the little checkbox next to it, and you click, that brings its options up. Now in this case, I want to create my windows for this wall. So I'll pick the x-axis so the cylinders will be on the side this way. Now here's the thing though. Usually, like I said, when we're creating primitives, if it's a cube, well, it's just a cube, right? But like a sphere or cylinder, we want it to be pretty low res, oftentimes, because we're going to maybe put it in smooth preview like we did with our light bulb, or in this case, our doorknob, right? It's easy to work with them, get the shape we want without having to add as many edge loops in by hand, right? So smooth preview can be a great shortcut, particularly if you work with pretty low resolution primitives. In this case, though, this room, right, is not going to go into smooth preview at all, right? It'll look too rounded. So it's going to stay low res. So if you're doing Booleans and your stuff's going to stay low res and you're not going to use smooth preview at all, your actual primitive should be denser. So in this case, since this room itself is not going to be put into smooth preview and we're not going to smooth it, I want my actual cylinder to be denser. Now, I have to figure out the number I want for this, right? We've kind of already mentioned that even numbers tend to be better. But in this case, because I want to cut the cylinder directly in half, right? And I mean that kind of like make it a half moon instead of a full circle, right? A half circle. I need it to be an even number that if we cut it in half is also an even number, right? So 30 would not work well because even though 30 is an even number, if you divide that by 2, that's 15. That's not an even number. So we'd want either 28 or 32 because 32 divided by 2 is 16. 28 divided by 2 is 14. In this case, to keep it a little simpler, we'll do 28, all right? So we'll create that, and there is our cylinder. And of course, I can hit W for move, all right? I can move it on the red axis out, move it up a little bit. Maybe R for scale to scale it down a bit. And of course, F, remember F is you frame your selection, right? So W is move, R scale, and then you just grab the specific handle, right, that you want to move it along. And oftentimes for scale, you're using the center one because it scales all the dimensions at the same time. If you just use one of them, right, it can make it too oval, particularly if it's these axes. Red won't matter that much, right? But you'll see that we can actually easily divide this in half now because see how there's kind of an edge loop right down the center because 28 divided by 2, 14. So I'm going to make sure the object's selected, right? Green wireframe means it's in object mode. Hold down right mouse button over it. Face selection, right? Because we want to grab polygons. And once again, this is where your pick mark key is great instead of drag select, right? Drag select can be great to kind of select these guys right here and not select anything else. But in this case, I actually want to select everything on the bottom half. So with pick mark key on and the camera based selection off, which is its default state, right? You can just left click drag a box, right? So I left click drag this box. I want to make it big enough so that it touches everything or everything's inside of it, right? And you see that selected the whole entire bottom half? So that's where pick mark key is kind of cool. Drag select is something I do more if I want to grab some of these guys right here and I want a more fast precision on one side of the mesh, whereas pick mark key is better for kind of grabbing pretty much everything the box touches. And then of course we can hit delete. And now we can see it's kind of created a half circle shape. Now in this case, I'm going to hold down right mouse button and I'm going to go to edge mode, right? Edge mode. And I'm going to grab an edge on this hole because once we delete all those faces, there is a hole here now, right? You see how there's no geometry here at all? It's open there. That's a hole. Now it's been a little while, right? We're going to see the fill hole tool more as we go on and do stuff, more stuff. but it has been a little while, right? I think the last time we really saw fill hole was on the end table, right? We kind of filled in the top of the drawer. So remember, if you select an edge, and it only has to be a single edge on a hole where there's no polygons, you can go to Mesh, Fill Hole. So how do you fill a hole in Maya? You fill a hole, right? Mesh, Fill Hole. And that creates an n-gon, because in this case there's a vertex here and here. So even though it looks like a quad, you'll notice vertex count-wise there's actually 6 vertices. Guys, do not be tricked by the fact that it looks like a quad. It is not. There are 2 other vertices on here making it a 6-sided polygon. That is an n-gon. But it's filled in, right? If you hit 3, you'll even see it looks weird, but it works correct, right? It's looking weird just because that's a big n-gon. You see how that n-gon pinches and pulls weird? So that's one of the reasons why we don't like n-gons that much, right? Is that, particularly on curved surfaces, they can make weird shapes that aren't what we want. In this case, this is staying low res, so we don't have to worry about that. And of course, we can extrude that face, hit W, and we can move it down, and you see we have an arch. So pretty easily, if you just think a little bit about the kind of axis divisions for your cylinder, you delete half of it, you fill a hole, and it's great because we get practice with, fill hole. We haven't seen that much yet. We saw it a little earlier, but we haven't seen it that much. And you have this shape here. Now this n-gon on the bottom shouldn't be a problem, but we now have an arch shape. Now I'm going to bring this in, and the way booleans work is you really want to make sure that they intersect, right? So you see how it actually is partially sticking through the room, right? It's partially sticking through the room. We want that. Also, booleans tend to work their best in Maya when they intersect a couple of polygons. Booleans can kind of behave a little weird and occasionally do some weird stuff if you were to just boolean into, like, say, a single polygon, right? If this was just, just one giant polygon, that might do some weird stuff, right? You don't actually want to do that. I was showing you to, you can just delete those edges. I just found Maya's Boolean tool works more predictably when you Boolean into at least 2 polygons. So there's a polygon here and a polygon here. And that's one of the reasons why I added divisions. One, a little more geometry always makes less artifacting and rendering. It also is going to help with some of these Booleans. Now in this case, I want 2 arched windows. So remember, if you hold down right mouse button for object mode, and you select an object, we can of course go to Edit, Duplicate, right? Control D. And then I can hit W for move, and I can move it over. And now we have 2 arched windows, all right? Now right now, though, they're not really arched windows, right? They're just arches sticking through a mesh. So that's where we want to talk about Booleans. And you see it's right here in Modeling Toolkit, although you will notice that it is in Mesh Booleans, right? Every tool that's in Modeling Toolkit is actually going to be like right here, like Symmetry's there. Mesh Tools has those. So Mesh, Edit Mesh, Mesh Tools, and even kind of like this little area here is going to have pretty much everything that's in Modeling Toolkit. It's just that Modeling Toolkit's nice and it's got it right out in the open, easy to get to. So I do like Modeling Toolkit because it's kind of like some really important modeling functions right there with easy access. But technically they're in the whole everywhere else, right? Like even quad draws right there. All right, so keep that in mind. So what does a Boolean do? Well, a Boolean is basically like kind of making cookies, right? You kind of flatten out the dough that you've gotten prepared and get into a nice long kind of sheet of dough, and you take a cookie cutter shape, right? Whatever the cookie cutter is, Christmas tree, pumpkin for Halloween kind of thing, right? You can just take it and you kind of stick that cookie cutter into the dough, and it cuts that shape out for the cookie shape, right? And you keep doing it. That's basically what a Boolean does. Particularly when we use subtract, it'll actually take these cylinders and cut it out of this shape. Now the biggest problem with that is it's going to create some giant n-gons on this wall, right? So if you ever wanted to put this into smooth preview, it's going to look horrible. I use Booleans only when I need to, right? There's lots of other great ways to model without Booleans, even though it might look like you model with a Boolean. We're actually going to see that on our clock radio using the extrude border edge method, right? So some people rely way too much on Booleans when they don't really have to if they know some other techniques. But there are times when you really need a Boolean. So for me, I always say if you don't really need a Boolean and there's other ways to get it quickly and easily, go that method, right? But occasionally, like in this instance, you really need the Boolean. And it's a great place to kind of show it off in an appropriate context. But Booleans often will create giant n-gons that have to be cleaned up if it's got to be in sub-Ds or smooth preview, or it's going to animate a lot. So, kind of be careful of Booleans. So in this case, how does a Boolean work? Well, we select the room itself, because that's the dough, and you always select the dough first, right? You have to have the dough prepared before you can use the cookie cutter. And then what you do is you select the cookie cutter. So I hold down Shift, because remember, Shift adds to selections, and I select this one. Now generally you kind of want to do them one at a time, and if you built your room fine, you should be good with the Booleans. But remember, if you extrude too many times or there's extra edge loops there, the Boolean might not work, right? It might actually give you an error. That's the kind of thing that if you built it exactly the way I built it in the videos, you should be fine. If you accidentally did some extra stuff that you didn't realize, it might cause some problems. And that's the kind of thing that we can kind of address on some one-on-one stuff, things like that. One-on-one conferences if we need to. So yeah, so in this case though, if I select the room and I hit 3, your room should look like this in 3, right? There shouldn't be any extra edge loops, right? If you hit 3 and all of a sudden you see something like this, you probably have an extra edge loop there that you didn't realize, and that could be causing the problem, right? And that's usually because you did extra extrusions you shouldn't have, right? Remember, the only extrusion you should have done in this room was just extrude to thicken it, bring it up, and that's it, right? So I've got the room selected. Hold down Shift to select the arch. And what we can do is we can go to Boolean right here, right? Boolean. And you'll notice that if your geometries are all correct and there's no extra geometry you're not expecting to have there, usually extra edge loops right on top of each other like we were talking about earlier, that causes problems with certain modeling functions. So whenever you extrude, whenever you add an edge loop in, you really should make sure that your extrusion gets moved or scaled a little bit, or when you add an edge loop in, you're not adding it right on top of another edge loop. Those can cause problems later on. But that's what your Boolean should do. Now you'll notice union kind of keeps one side, this side, right, and gets rid of the other side and makes those one geometry. Now you'll notice though that we have other options here, right? You can go to click on the union word, right, and it pops up this. So I just click on the word union and it gives us other options. There's intersection, which kind of keeps just the outer part, and there's difference, which is kind of the reverse of union, right? So it keeps the other side. And that's what we're really looking for, is difference. Class edge classification is usually fine, but you can switch that to normal, and then it just kind of doesn't keep the extra stuff. In this case, I want to keep the extra stuff to make it look like there's thickness for this window. That's how Boolean works. So I'll click, hit Q to turn that off, right? Q is a great way to exit whatever tool you're in, and just go back to your selection tool. The room's already selected, right? You select that first, and then we hold down Shift because you select the dough first, right? Because you have to have the dough ready first. Then you grab your cookie cutter, right? So Shift, left click to grab the arch, the other arch, because that's your cookie cutter. And then we go to Boolean, and we left click on union in the operation area to switch to difference. And there's our Booleans. Now in this case, I don't want those polygons there, so I can hold down, I can zoom in a little further. Hold down right mouse button for face, and I can select those faces, right? This is where box select's great. Although if I hold down tab for drag select, that's pretty quick too, right? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move these in a little bit. So W for move, bring them in. So that there's kind of still gonna be a bit of thickness there, but not tons. Hit delete. And there's your arched windows. Now that's cool, right? That's a Booleans in this instance are awesome. If you're doing that on a curved spaceship from Star Wars or Star Trek, not so cool, right? Because you'll notice that this is a giant n-gon. Look how many actual polygons are involved with this. This is probably a 20-sided polygon. And the moment you put this in a smooth preview, look how ugly and horrible that looks. This is one of the primary reasons we don't like n-gons on anything that animates, deforms, changes shape, anything that's got a lot of roundness or curvature. It's going to create horrible, weird shapes. It's going to animate unpredictably. That's why n-gons suck and why we don't really like them. Having said that, because this room doesn't animate, doesn't change its shape, because it's not rounded and curved, you notice how this looks good? So this is one of those instances where you can actually do an n-gon, right? And if you really can't, remember, you can always go to face mode, select these faces, right? And remember, there is the ability in the mesh menu, I showed this a little bit the other day, triangulate. So that way it's all triangles, right? triangles are hard to model with. You couldn't keep doing modeling easily on this, but they are a quite predictable polygon, right? They're always planar, they'll deform predictably. So if you can't have n-gons, you can always triangulate that section that you did your booleans on. But oftentimes n-gons are fine in this circumstance, right? Because the n-gon really can't get in any trouble, right? Can't get in any trouble at all. So that'll be a great place to stop for this video.